I want to welcome everybody to the Resident and Family Support Council that we hold on the second and the fourth Tuesday of every month. These meetings are sponsored by the Illinois Pioneer Coalition. They allow us to use their Zoom account. So we thank them for allowing us to use this account so we can have these meetings. Know that the link that you used to get into this meeting today is the same link for every single meeting. So you'll always be able to, if you just save this link, you'll be able to access on the second and the fourth Tuesday of every month at 3 o'clock. We are thrilled to have to continue to talk about this topic. Last time we ran out of time. We started talking about the complaint process, and we had Becky Jorn from IDPH, Illinois Department of Public Health, talk to us and share about the complaint process and what that looks like from the IDPH side. Becky has graciously said that she would join us again today for any further questions that we may have. So Becky is a part of this meeting. And then also we have Kelly Richards, who is the state long-term care ombudsman, and she's going to talk about what it's like for the ombudsman program in regards to complaints, when we get complaints, and how that looks different than when IDPH gets complaints. And then we also have Jonathan from IDPH as well. He's joining us, and he's going to actually talk about the survey process. And because a lot of questions came up last time when we were talking about the complaint process, about the survey process. So we welcome Jonathan Harwood here as well from IDPH. So since Becky is here, if anybody has any questions off the top, please go ahead and raise your hand or unmute yourself, and we could go ahead and get that question asked. If I don't see anybody doing that, what we'll go ahead and do is we'll start with Kelly's presentation. And then if you have any questions along the way for Becky, you can make sure that you ask those as well. So I would like to introduce Kelly Richards, the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman. And Kelly, I know the process between Illinois Department of Public Health and the Ombudsman program. Both these entities take complaints from residents and families and all of those all of those pieces, but we're looking forward to hearing how this makes it different, what the Ombudsman program does, and what makes that different than what Illinois Department of Public Health does.
Sure, Lee, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I know I have Jonathan coming behind me, so I'll try to be as brief as I possibly can, brief but thorough. How about that? As I possibly can, and feel free as I go along, if you have questions, you can put them into the chat. The Ombudsman program is different from the Illinois Department of Public Health. They are the regulatory body. We serve as advocates, as I'm sure that all of you all know. We serve as the voice of the resident. If the resident cannot direct, we will take direction from the family member, the power of attorney, or let me correct that, the power of attorney, the agent under power of attorney, or the guardian. So you may be wondering where we get complaints from, and we get complaints from various sources. Complaints can come from when we do facility visits. We get complaints from phone calls, emails, legislators, the governor's office. We get complaints from resident council meetings or family council meetings. Various sources. We get them from residents. We get them from facility staff, we get them from hospitals, community members, legislators, clergy. They can be anonymous complaints. Overall, we can get complaints from anyone, and we get complaints from various entities and various sources.
Yeah, and Kelly, just to add to that, I know that I've personally gotten complaints from a paramedic once before who was coming into a facility, and he had some concerns and he called the state office. So we get them from so many different sources. It's really kind of amazing. And it's good that people are being cognizant about that and know that they can call.
Right. I mean, and that's kind of the point of this discussion, to let other people know, about the program and the fact that we can take complaints. And a complainant is an individual who requests Ombudsman program to investigate a complaint that's happening in the facility, whether it be a care issue, whether it be a food issue, issues with how the staff may be treating the residents. There are different types of complaints that come our way, and the program is resident directed. So we will start with the resident to determine if the resident wants us to proceed with investigating these complaints. There are also situations sometimes where there are unvoiced concerns that happen. And the reason why these things happen is the fear of retaliation. Residents don't want to have staff get in trouble. They may believe that this is what life looks like in a long-term care facility, which is not the case at all. They may have complained before and feel like nothing has happened, or they may just feel like they're afraid that this will they will be left and nothing will be resolved with complaining. So we wanted to talk more about what the complaint process looks like and how the Ombudsman program can assist residents and their family members with addressing complaints. We also look at systemic complaints, and what we mean by systemic complaints are complaints that may be impacting all of the residents in the facility. So for example, there may be a situation where residents are feeling that the food is cold at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or just maybe at lunch, or the coffee is cold, or there may be an issue with residents not having their call lights answered. We call these kind of complaints that are impacting all of the residents as systemic complaints, and we can go in and we can investigate those complaints and work to resolve those complaints to the satisfaction of the residents. We must, of course, have consent to act. But if there's a systemic complaint and the Ombudsman is aware that there are several residents that have complaints about the same issue, we can pursue that complaint without naming residents. We can say we're investigating a systemic complaint because we've spoken to several residents that have this same issue. But when there's an individual complaint, we absolutely have to have consent to move forward with any investigation related to an individual complaint. Again, that could be a care issue. It could be the fact that the resident is not being treated well. The resident has been abused. The resident is not being taken to physical therapy. There could be a lot of different care issues or other issues that could be considered a complaint. And again, it's the resident's perspective of what the complaint is, and we cannot act without giving permission or of that resident to move forward to investigate the complaint. And what we do is we talk to the resident, we find out what the resident wants us to do. So we would, depending on where the complaint came from, if it didn't come from a resident and it came from a different person, let's say the power of attorney or just a concerned loved one, or maybe even a staff member, we would begin getting the facts about what the complaint is, and then we would go and we would start with the resident. And
so Kelly, just to clarify, because there was a question that came up in the chat, to make sure that the consent that we're getting is from the resident, not from the facility to investigate it.
Correct. Absolutely. Absolutely. The Ombudsman program is resident directed. So we have to take direction from the resident and get the consent from the resident. And if there's a situation, like I said before, that the resident does not have capacity and cannot direct us, then we have to take that direction and get consent from that agent under power of attorney or the guardian.
So if a staff member makes a complaint, because it's another comment that came up in the chat, if a staff member makes a complaint, they're just the complainant. They are not the client. The client is always the resident. So we always go to the resident, correct?
Yes,
For
we,
make
yes.
sure.
Yes, we always have to start with the resident, regardless of where the complaint came from, whether it's a husband, a wife, a grandchild, a daughter, the police, a staff member. We have to start with the resident. And I think there was another question that just popped up, Lee.
Yeah, there is. So that's talking about this retaliation. What is done if there is retaliation? And we know that this came out on our last call, and it's come out on several other calls when we've talked about different things. This fear of retaliation, and we've heard it over and over again, is real. And so is there a repercussion if a facility does retaliate against a resident? Is there something that can happen here, or what?
Well, yeah, I mean, if we if we find out that a facility is retaliating against a resident, the ombudsman, with permission again, has to get the permission in order to talk with the staff, talk with the administrator. We can have a conversation with the resident and find out if they want to file a complaint against the facility for retaliating against them. And we can help walk the resident through what this process looks like to address their concerns regarding retaliation. We recognize that retaliation, the fear of retaliation is very, very real. And I know that, and we all know that residents sometimes have reservations in reporting certain things because of that fear of retaliation. But the ombudsmen are here to help support, to guide in terms of whatever the resident wants us to do to address these concerns.
And I think when it comes to this retaliation, that's one of the things is the systemic. So if we have a resident and they're like, no, I don't want you to bring my name into it. They're not answering call lights, but, I'm afraid that if you bring this forward, they're not going to answer any of my call lights. They are answering them maybe after an hour, but I'm afraid they're going to completely ignore me. So one of the things that we will do is to then look to see if we can approach it systemically. So that the person will go and we'll talk to other people. We'll ask other people, are there issues with the call lights? Do you feel that they're being responsive to you? And if there is, and sometimes we can dive in that direction so that the resident can feel a little bit safer. There is another question. So a systemic issue that staff sees, like no hot water for showers or heat. The ombudsman needs to hear it from a resident and not staff. So that question, the answer, they're thinking that the resident's the only one who can make the complaint, but no, a staff member can make the complaint. But what we would do is that would be a systemic issue. We would actually go to the facility and see about the hot water and what's going on with the hot water.
And then we would also be talking to residents in the facility to ask them, have they had experiences where there isn't any hot water? And so we would be doing our due diligence, like Lee said, go to the facility, talk with the residents, and communicate the concerns that we're hearing about this systemic complaint related to the hot water. Lee, this kind of dovetails into what I was trying to talk about just in terms of our intake process and what the plan looks like. We would talk with the resident, find out what they want to have done in relationship to the situation. And then we would work with the resident and the facility to resolve whatever the issue is to the satisfaction of the resident.
It looks like Stephen, you've got a question.
Well, I have a comment on Hope's question on the systemic issue where there's no hot water in the facility. What I would tell that staff is that if they feel that there is an abuse or neglect of some sort, that they are mandated reporters, and that calling me, the ombudsman, does not fulfill their mandate to report abuse. And for that, they need to call the Department of Public Health. So that's what I would do in that situation. And then, of course, go out and investigate, talk to residents, and see what they're experiencing with the water situation.
And I think you bring up a good point, is that you don't have to make just a complaint with the ombudsman or IDPH. You simultaneously can make a complaint
Mhm.
with both entities. So I think that's important for people to know, that you don't have to choose which one you want to file a complaint with. You can do it with both us as well as IDPH. Isn't that correct, Becky? I don't know if Becky, part of us.
There, that is correct, yes.
Okay, so that's good. That's good to hear. I think that's can be important for people. Many times, if it is something like Stephen said, you know, this is hot water, showers, no heat. These things can be very compromising. So that's when you may want to make that choice and that decision. And many times we will, as ombudsman, you know, we may say, you can also, here's the number for if you want to make a complaint to IDPH, that's perfectly up to you. You can do that as well. I'm sorry, Kelly, go ahead.
Oh, no, this is great conversation. Look, keep interrupting me.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Right, no problem, no problem. So I want to talk a little bit about the Ombudsman program's complaint response time. So if we get a complaint that involves abuse, gross neglect, or the Ombudsman has reason to believe that the resident is at risk, then our response time would be the expectation is that our response time is within the next business day from the receipt of that message or information that came to the regional ombudsman program. And that also includes complaints regarding the use of restraints, and also the complaint of an actual or threatened of a transfer or discharge from a facility within 2 calendar days. And then as it relates to abuse or gross neglect, and the ombudsman really does not have reason to believe that the resident is at risk. Let's say the resident has left the facility or gone home or is in the hospital, then our requirements are within 3 business days of receipt of that message. And then any other types of complaints, our response time is between 7 and 21 business days or less, depending on the severity of the complaint. I will say to all of you all that more often than not, when complaints do come, the ombudsman tend to try to respond as quickly as we possibly can. So I just wanted to point that out and show the difference in terms of how our response times differ than what Becky had talked about in terms of the complaints that come into IDPH and where we differ from them. What was the other thing that I had another thought, it'll come back to me.
Well, just to make a comment, and while you're trying to think, you made a point saying business days. I think that's important. We are not, the Ombudsman program, we're not first responders. So because of this, we're not open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if a complaint comes in on a Saturday, we won't get that until Monday, typically. So just for people to be mindful of that as well. And then there is a question that also came in. So if a resident puts in a complaint and no other residents are brave enough to risk retaliation and back up the complainant, is there any other way to find a resolution?
Find a resolution for the complaint.
So my initial response is, we don't need many people to give us a complaint. One person giving us a complaint is enough to act. So it's not that you need, you know, the more the merrier kind of a thing. So if it is a call light issue and we're only hearing it from one person, we will work with that individual to work on the call light issue, even if no one else in their hallway is saying that call lights is an issue for them. So that is something, and we will actually go to the person and say, what is it that you would like to see? And it may be, well, you know, it's every morning they're not answering my call light, and it's basically because they put my eyeglasses across the room, and I need my eyeglasses in order to be able to watch TV while I'm waiting for care. So it may be that simple, and it might just be the morning time that people are feeling that you know, that they're not answering my call lights. So other people aren't experiencing that same thing. So then moving forward, it's just don't put the eyeglasses across the room, put the eyeglasses in the bedside table next door. And so that problem could be resolved. So we're always looking from the resident's point of view, what it is that they want to see happen in regards to the complaint that they're bringing forward. And we don't need many to substantiate that complaint. If you said it's something that's going on in your life, it's something going on in your life, and we honor and respect that, and we will move forward with it no matter what.
And Lee, you kind of took the words out of my mouth. I was hung up on the resolution part of the question, and we tried to resolve, and I think I may have mentioned this earlier, to the satisfaction of the resident. So it's very important for us to find out if it's just that one resident, what do they want to see happen? And we will work our very best to try to resolve it based on what they're wanting to see happen. Stephen, I see you popped on. Did you want to interject?
Yeah, I was just gonna, and I think Lee and you pretty well covered it. I only need permission from one resident in order to work on a complaint towards a resolution. Now, if it's a systemic complaint, you know, I've talked to two people eating the same thing, and one person says it's too spicy, the other one says it's not spicy enough. You know, those types of things, a little bit harder to resolve for everyone, but for the most part, I just need one person to say, go ahead and work, help me out.
And if for a solution like that, it may look like, you know what, get some Mrs. Dash, and the facility may be able to have some Mrs. Dash at the residence table so that they can spice it up themselves as they want. So we do try to be where it's like we said, it's not just we need many people to come up with the complaint. One person, one complaint, take in and move forward with that.
Right.
There was also a question about being not being first responders. Just to clarify, you were closed on major holidays. Therefore, you will follow up on a weekend on the following Tuesday, or do you have someone on call on holidays?
Well, no, thank you, Lee. No, we're not first responders. My recommendation, because we are closed on holidays and on weekends, we typically don't have ombudsmen that are on call. And so the recommendation I would give is, if there is a complaint that you all have regarding something that's happening in the facility, is to reach out to the Illinois Department of Public Health and file your complaint with them if we are closed for whatever the reason. And if you still want to leave a message, absolutely do so when we come back into the office. Whatever program you've contacted, they will be responding to you as well.
So Becky, just to ask you a question, follow up with this. So if you guys, do you have someone on call on holidays and weekends?
Yes, we have during our business hours, 8:30 to 4:40. Monday through Friday is our normal business hours. Anything after 4:40 during the week and all day Saturday and Sunday, we have an on-call after hours. So you can make a call 24 hours a day.
So I guess we want to encourage people, if this is an event that is truly compromising your life and it needs immediate concern, if you call the Ombudsman office on a Saturday morning, don't expect to get a phone call back until Monday. But if it's very compromising to your life, call IDPH, because they will be able to respond much quicker. Like if it's the heat, if the heat in the building isn't working, if you call us, we're not going to get it till Monday, but IDPH will get it right away and be able to send somebody out right away to make sure that people get the heat that they deserve to have.
Yeah.
And Lee, I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify one thing with the after hours calls. The after hours calls, again, would be like the egregious calls where there's abuse or neglect or harm or potential likely harm to a resident. Those are prioritized on the weekends. If someone would have a call that maybe, I don't know, the call light wasn't answered, or they didn't get a shower, they missed a shower, the complaint is still filed. But the priority ones for after hours are the abuse, neglect, and if there's any egregious theft, those are the ones that are prioritized, especially over the weekend, when you want to get somebody out there because there's potential harm or a harm to the residents.
And that makes a lot of sense, because you don't want to be investigating cold food when somebody may be having something egregious happening. That may be
correct. Yes,
so
but the complaint is still filed, and it will still be scheduled and investigated. However, the prioritization is more for the abuse, neglect, theft for after hours and the weekends.
That makes so
Right.
much sense. Thank you.
Lee, the last thing that I wanted to mention before we move on, because I don't want to take a lot of Jonathan's time. I wanted to just talk about, and this kind of segues into some of what we're talking about. There are instances where we may have to refer a resident to the Illinois Department of Public Health, which I've already said, or HFS if it's a supportive living facility. We may have to refer to, depending on the complaint, we may have to refer the resident or the power of attorney or guardian to legal services or another entity to help to resolve the complaint, depending on what that complaint is. So sometimes there are situations where the Ombudsman program is limited and just in terms of resources. We are not a legal entity. So if the complaint involved something that the resident needed from a legal standpoint, then we would absolutely refer the resident out. So I just wanted to point that out as well.
And I think that I know we had an issue came up about a resident who had some needs that the facility had identified, and they were looking for the ombudsman to reach out to the resident to talk to them about those needs and give them resources in the community to fulfill that need. But we won't do that unless the resident asks us. We're not social workers. We're not community social workers. I think that that's important for people to understand too. We do give resources at the request of the resident. If it's to help with their issue, we're not going to abstractly go up to somebody and say, you know, I hear that there was a particular person who was abusing alcohol. So, you know, this is what the facility told me. So here's some resources that you can utilize in the community. We won't do that. We won't overstep like that. That's something that the facility is responsible for doing. So
yeah, and I just to piggyback off of what you were saying, Leah, just reminds me of something that you and I were talking about earlier with the particular situation. There's a misnomer that people think that we are best interest. You know, if there's an expectation for the ombudsman to do certain things, especially if we may have seen something in the nursing homes and we cannot, because the program is resident directed, we have to have that consent and permission from the resident to act. We are not best interest. And I'm sure that a lot of you all know that, but some of you all may not. And we find often, and I see Stephen shaking his head, a lot of people make an assumption about what they think we're supposed to be doing. And they're very surprised when they find out, like, you can't do that. No, we have to start with the resident and have a conversation with the resident and find out what the resident wants, because that complainant's concerns may not be the resident's concerns. And when we get to the resident may say, hey, that's not my issue. I understand my daughter has this issue. It's not my issue, but let me tell you what is my issue. I want help on this, that, or the other. And then the ombudsman will begin having a conversation with the resident about and constructing a plan to address whatever those concerns are.
So just to let everyone know what that potentially could look like. Let's say, for example, a family member calls and says, my father is refusing medication and he won't take his medication. And so could you please make him take his medication? Well, we can't. We will go to the resident, talk to the resident. The resident may say, I don't like my blood pressure medication because it makes me feel dizzy. I don't like it. It gives me an upset stomach. I don't like it. I don't want it. So that, I'm sorry, so if something like that happens, we're not going to, that's where we're not best interest. Yes, we all know that if you have high blood pressure, you may need to take that pill to be able to regulate it, but we're not going to be, we don't do what we think is right for the resident. We do purely what the resident says that they want us to do. And this can be very, very difficult for people to understand, particularly in the moment. Sometimes people understand it on the surface, but then when we're diving deep into a problem and a family member's like, but I want my mother to leave this building. I don't get there. We go to the resident and the resident likes the building. They have friendships. They want to stay there. They want to be there. And the daughter's like, that administrator, I don't like him. I don't want my mother there. Well, it's up to the resident who lives there. We have to listen to them. We cannot, that's how we act. So just for people to be fully aware of that. There was a question, another question for Becky. Becky, would you recommend that people can email if they have access instead of calling? Also, depending on the severity? What do you feel is the better way?
Either way, I will say that if you send an email, it goes to the dph.ccr@illinois.gov email, and that email is reviewed throughout the day. It is quicker from what I've been told by some complainants that they can send the email through. And also, if you have a question or if CCR needs additional information, they can email you back. A lot of people will forget to put their mailing address or a phone number in the email. It's a quick way to respond back and forth, especially if additional information is needed. If you call in and can get through, if you forget something, sometimes you can try to call back or send an email. I think it's what works best for the complainant or the caller, because not everyone has access to email, but email is another way, and it is reviewed every day. It goes through the mailbox. There's several of us that have access to that, and it is prioritized just as a call would be prioritized. They go through and look and they prioritize your 24 hours, your abuse, neglect, and theft. So someone may send something in at 10 o'clock and somebody may send something in at 10:05. But if the 10:05 is related to abuse, neglect, and theft, that's going to be prioritized prior to something else that is not as egregious. So they are prioritized the same as a call. The allegations are received, the information is the same, and they are triaged and sent to the region the same way. So I think it's more of a preference.
Got it. Okay. And then there is another question then, Kelly, if an ombudsman sees something, we cannot report it. Example, like someone being verbally abused. So if an ombudsman sees somebody being verbally abused, what would we do about that?
We're going directly to the resident, and we're having a conversation with the resident and talking about the inappropriateness of that, asking them, do they give us permission? How do they want us to handle it? And we have to be guided by the resident in whatever it is that we do. If it's a situation where the resident cannot communicate with us, then we need to begin finding out, does that resident have a representative? We just would not walk past it and act like we didn't see it or ignore it or anything like that. We have to get that consent to begin to act on it. If there's a situation where the resident can't communicate, that let's say the person that is doing the verbal abuse is that agent under power of attorney, then Stephen, as the ombudsman, will be having a conversation with me, the state ombudsman, to say, hey, Kelly, I witnessed this. This is what happened. The bad actor is the power of attorney. Will you grant me permission to begin to advocate for the resident? And my response will be yes, based on the information, the scenario that I just created. The answer would be yes in that instance.
And I think it's also, so we're not mandated reporters. That's the ombudsman are not mandated reporters, which is part of the reason is so we can make sure that we are very confidential in regards to working with the resident. So they have no fear that we're going to say anything that they don't want us to say. And that's the reason why we're not mandated reporters. But other facility staff are mandated reporters. So if there was a staff member there that also witnessed that verbal abuse happening by the towards the resident, many times we will look to that staff member and just say, remember, you're a mandated reporter,
right.
So that they know that we saw that, and that they must go and say something to their abuse coordinator in their building, and make sure that they are that they're doing something about it. So that's again a very, very unique thing of the ombudsman, is that we're not mandated. So I think that's something that a lot of people also have a hard time sometimes wrapping their brain around. There's another question. I'm familiar with the nursing home's concern form. Does the ombudsman program have a formal form to complete in the event I prefer my expressed concern to be in writing? And
no.
Yeah, we don't have any. If you went in writing, you could just go ahead, and we get emails a lot, whether it's regionally or at the state level. We get emails about concerns that people have. So that's really the only way we get it in writing ever. So if that's your preferred way to do this, then you can definitely email. And I know that Stephen has provided at the beginning of this conversation today, the resources for how you can get a hold of your local ombudsman. And there's emails attached, the email is attached to that list. So you can go ahead and you can email them directly that way as well.
Lee, can I just add one more thing to what I was saying in reference to my response?
Yes.
When we observe or become aware of abuse, we don't make a hard stop and say, hey, you know, we don't have permission, we're not going to do anything. If there is a situation, and I'll create another situation where we have observed or we are aware that abuse has happened to a resident by a staff member, we're going to have a conversation with that resident. And it may be very raw for that resident at that particular time that we're having the conversation. And so we won't make a hard stop and say, okay, well, we'll leave you alone and not come back to it. We may go around the rest of the facility, continue our visit, circle back with the resident towards the end of our visit and see if the resident is in a different mindset or space where they want to talk about it. It could be that they still don't want to talk about it when we come back to them, but we won't let it go. We would come back the next day or have a conversation, leave information and say, hey, is it okay if I check in with you tomorrow or in a couple of hours, and begin trying to talk to the resident about the importance of getting that permission to act on what we have been told or what we have been seeing. Because if that staff member has done that to that person, perhaps they are doing it to someone else.
Mhm.
And we are trying to protect the rights of all the residents. And of course, again, if it's a situation where the resident is just very adamant, is like, no, I don't want you to do anything. Don't look in my direction. Don't come in my room. Then Stephen is probably going to give me a call, give Leah a call and say, hey, this is the situation. Let me tell you, will you grant me permission to begin to advocate?
And, you know, just to also look back at Nick's question, Nick, there's nothing to say that you can't, with the concern form that the facility may have, that you can't give us a copy of that as well. So whatever you wrote to the facility, if you wrote a concern to the facility and you feel they're not acting on it, you can give, or even just to give us a heads up, the facility is doing something with it, but you want to give us a heads up that this was something that you had a concern about, you can give us a copy of the facility form. We have no problem with that either. And then Mary, you wanted to ask a question live. Would you like to go ahead and ask?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Mary.
Hi, how you doing? I guess I'm pretty surprised that you're not, I understand now, but I'm surprised that you're not mandatory reporters.
Yeah.
I guess I'm a little.
Without consent. Without consent.
Yeah, without consent. But I'm a little appalled that if you guys witness, if you witness someone having been hit, there's nothing, you can't do anything because the resident at that point, I can see, having been in that situation, would be terrified to say, yes, go after it, because they're doing the retaliation in front of you. What are they going to do when you're not in the building? Because you're going to leave at some point in that day, and that resident is left.
Yeah.
They've already been hit. So how much worse is it going to get? I can see that being just, there's no way they're going to allow you to do anything, but you've witnessed it. You know it happened. Is there any way for you guys to help this poor person?
Well, Mary, I tell you what I would do. I just got done doing a couple of visits this morning. I'm, boots on the ground. I go out to nursing homes just about every day. And what I would do thankfully, I haven't witnessed abuse. I've gotten reports of it, but I haven't actually seen it in front of me. What I would do is I would go in and introduce myself right then and there. Say, hi, my name's Steve. I'm the Ombudsman. How are you doing? And the staff at that point is probably going to walk out of the room or straighten up and make it look like they weren't doing anything. So, don't think that we're going to just ignore it.
Right.
we're
that's
gonna
what
go
I'm
in and talk to that person.
Right.
But what does that
And-
do for the resident? Because again, you leave and who's going to be retaliated against?
If I may, I have something on the regulatory side that may address that. If anyone sees something, you are the facility. Now with the ombudsman, you would talk to the resident, you would go through your process with the resident. If the resident was okay, it would be reported. Let's say that the ombudsman is the only one that witnessed it. There was no other, and the staff member. You can go to the facility because the administrator is required to report for a
Mhm.
facility reported incident that the event occurred. And if it's abuse or neglect or potential harm, then that employee should be suspended pending an investigation. That is one way that it could protect that resident or minimize their risk of retaliation or their fear of retaliation during the investigation that the facility is required to do if there's an allegation of abuse. That is something else if the ombudsman has that opportunity to discuss with the administrator or the director of nursing what they observed. It's not a complaint. You're just reporting an incident. They are required to report that to public health. Then public health would review that information and they have to send a final report within 5 days. So that may or may not resolve the issue, but it is another avenue.
Yeah. The point, though, is we have to have permission from the resident to go and report that to the administrator. Because we know that they're mandated reporters. And like I mentioned to you before, and Stephen kind of furthered the point, we would start with the resident, go and have a conversation with the resident, explain why it's very important for them to give us the permission to do it, and give them all the whys, right? Of why, how it could help, how it could prevent this from happening to other people, et cetera, et cetera. Stephen has the ability to reach out to me, the state ombudsman, if he's feeling like, hey, this is egregious, I'm concerned based on what the resident is saying, they're concerned for their safety. Kelly, I need permission. I will then grant that permission and allow him to go and have a conversation with the administrator or make that report to the Illinois Department of Public Health, et cetera.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing for us, but this is all federally mandated because, as human beings, our initial reaction is, oh my gosh, we've got to tell somebody about this. So as a human being, it doesn't feel like it's the right thing to do. But then if you look at it, if a resident explicitly is telling us, no, I don't want you to say anything, and then we go ahead and we do it, we've just completely violated their trust in the program, the entire program. So it doesn't, neither way feels right, but we've got to do what we have to do based upon what our regulations say for the Ombudsman program. And Kelly is the only one in the state who can give that authority. And there's never been an instance where there's been something egregious that's happened that Kelly hasn't given permission to move forward with it.
Right.
So I know it feels funky, Mary, but we've got to, I know it feels really funky.
Right.
Well,
And from
And this will be my last point, because I know we got Jonathan, Lee, and I'm trying to keep us on track. You may be thinking, well, what if Kelly is off? Then it would go to Lee, and Lee will get a hold of me and say, hey, this is an emergent situation. We need you, and I will be available. There hasn't been a time, I've been the ombudsman going on 5 years now, and there hasn't been a time where something has risen to my level where I have not acted.
And many
Well,
times,
I guess for me, what I'm really trying to get to is
Mm-hmm.
how do we fight retaliation? Because I can tell you a whole building of people that have just learned to not say anything at all because of it. I think you're aware of what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, what can happen to them is atrocious.
Mhm.
But there's no way to fix it, because what do? No one is able, because they're not there to see it, or even if they are, they may not, if the resident won't let them do anything because they're afraid of something happening. There's no real answer for it. And that's what I'm looking for.
You know, Mary, I think this would be a great topic for another resident and family support council meeting, because I think there's many people, we've heard this before throughout our meetings for various topics. And I think there's so many people that really could benefit from a really good, deep conversation on this. And maybe with the power of many, we'll be able to give more confidence to people, and also at the same time, just really make it be that retaliation is completely not allowed. So and
That would be
even though
great.
there's a big fear, so I'm going to put that, I just wrote that down. Thank you for that. So I think that would be a really great one of our
I
coming
agree.
topics.
I agree.
So thank you, Mary.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Is there any other, Kelly, did you have any other?
No, I didn't. I'm good. Unless there are any other questions for me, but I know that we have another speaker behind me. I didn't want to take up all the time.
Yes, so we've got Jonathan, Jonathan Harwood from IDPH, Illinois Department of Public Health. And Jonathan, do you want to just share your role? You oversee the survey process for IDPH, correct? Okay.
Hello. Yes. Sorry, I was getting myself. I had muted myself. So yes. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah. So my name is Jonathan Harwood. I am the division chief for the long-term care field operations for Illinois Department of Public Health. And so our role is regulatory. We oversee the survey process for the state and federal regulations for the nursing facilities. So I can go through a little bit of the complaint investigation process. If you like, I did a brief PowerPoint. So if I can, I will share my screen here and see if this will work. So just give me a minute, okay?
Yep.
I'm not as familiar with Zoom. We usually use WebEx, so this is a little bit new. So just bear with me for 1 minute here.
Yeah, and just while you're doing that, one of the reasons why we chose Zoom for this is because so many people during the pandemic, families and residents got comfortable with Zoom. So that and as the Ombudsman program, we don't have a Zoom account, and that's why the Illinois Pioneer Coalition lets us use theirs because we don't have a Zoom. So this is just kind of a little backstory on that one. So thank you, Jonathan.
Yes. Okay, so can you all see my screen? It should say complaint investigations with my name.
Yep, we got it.
Okay, good. Okay, so at least we've gotten over one hurdle there. Okay, I got the screen shared correctly, so that's a plus. Okay, so anyway, I introduced myself. My name is Jonathan Harwood, so I'll take you a little bit through, and I do apologize if some of this might be redundant from last week. I'm not sure of all. I wasn't able to be at the last meeting, so I'm not sure what Becky shared. So if some of it overlaps, I do apologize. I'll try to make some. Try to go through everything quickly to make sure that we are on time. So. Okay, so just a little bit of background. So let me get one thing here, sorry. So the IDPH Office of Healthcare Regulation has many divisions that are associated with it, like I kind of described earlier. So my division is the Division of Long-Term Care Field Operations, which is responsible for reviewing the complaint intakes, assigning the appropriate responsible parties, and then getting that information out to the correct regional office so that it can be assigned appropriately. So the assigned regional office then is responsible to ensure that the complaint is assigned to a surveyor. That surveyor is an individual who has had specific training, knowledge about the state and federal regulations, the survey process, and is able to initiate and investigate that complaint allegation. And so kind of as Becky, I think, had stated, depending on the severity of the complaint and the various allegations that might be associated with it, that will determine the time frame on which we will go in and initiate that complaint. So the complaints are typically assigned to begin within the 24-hour, 1-day period, 7 days, or within 30 days of receiving that. We can receive those complaints via multiple methods. We have that nursing home hotline, complaint hotline, as Becky, I think, had mentioned. That call can be phoned in anonymously. After hours, there is an after hours call center that will take the information and then send it to the central complaint registry. to further process that. It can be sent in via email. We do get handwritten letters from time to time. And then, of course, it can be sent in via fax. And just a little bit of reference in 2021 and the 2022 numbers are still getting finalized. That's why I only have the 2021. There was approximately 9,732 complaints that were received throughout Illinois. And this is nursing homes, but also intermittent care facilities. So those individuals that are living with intellectual disabilities, assisted living facilities, and then specialized mental health rehabilitative facilities. So that just kind of gives you an idea of kind of what we work with, on an annual basis.
That's a lot.
It is a lot. Yes. So that's why we are extremely busy. We just have some preliminary numbers for 2022, but it's projected that it looks like that number's going to be increased by about 9% from 2021 for 2022. So we are looking that we are increasing that volume of complaints significantly. So as I just kind of stated, the complaint can arrive, it arrives to the central complaint registry via either the phone call, the fax, the email. The central complaint registry is responsible then for taking it, getting the necessary information, putting it into our data tracking system. They will review it. They will determine the level to assign. So, does it need to be investigated within that 24-hour period, 7 days, or 30 days? And then once that is determined, it is assigned to the appropriate responsible party, which is designated for the appropriate regional office, so that those individuals can further review and make that assignment for a surveyor to go on site. So then once that information is assigned to the appropriate responsible party and or the appropriate regional office, the regional office will review a list of their new and or pending complaints daily. So that management staff will meet daily. They'll make a determination, prioritize those complaint investigation surveys. And there's multiple factors that can kind of go into the determination as far as prioritization. As Becky had mentioned earlier, any of those abuse, neglect, anything that involves imminent danger to the residents' well-being will be prioritized, as needing investigated sooner rather than later. Other factors might be the number of surveys or complaints that are at that one facility, the number of allegations that might be associated with the complaint, if there are multiple complaints at a particular facility, and then just the availability and the geography of the surveillance staff available for assignment. So all those factors, the regional office and the management will review in determining complaint assignment. So they will review that daily. Once they do determine who will go on site to investigate the complaint, they will provide the complaint intake information to the assigned surveyor or survey team. And so that surveyor will have the complainant's information, which is kept confidential. The surveyor will attempt as part of the survey process to contact the complainant just to verify the information that they have is accurate, and to determine if there is any additional information that they would like to provide. Sometimes from the time that it is phoned in or emailed in additional information, they become aware of additional information. So when that surveyor makes contact, they like to relay that to the surveyor so they have that during their investigation. So the surveyor will make a good faith effort to, try to contact that complainant. They may request that the complainant call the regional office back so that the phone call can be directed to them so that they can speak to them. So the surveyor then, once they receive the information, get the team together, they will go on site, initiate, and conduct the investigation. As I stated before, the surveyor always keeps the complainant's information and any resident-specific information that might be named in that complaint confidential. They cannot just disclose that information. They can't say that this individual was the person who phoned in the complaint. So they will keep that confidential. They will attempt to contact the resident and speak to that resident if there is a resident that's named in the particular complaint. Obviously, if the resident is able to be interviewed, they will, talk to the resident, ask specific questions regarding the care the individual is receiving, maybe any specific focus concerns that might be noted within the complaint. If the resident is not able to be interviewed or not able to provide good feedback, then the surveyor may reach out to the power of attorney or the family that's listed on the chart, or the guardian if the resident has a guardian. So they will attempt to reach out and speak to somebody on behalf of the resident. As part of the survey process, the surveyor will also review the medical record for the individual or individuals that are named within the complaint to determine if any of the allegation areas are noted or documented as part of the medical record. They'll do a various medical record review, including the plan of care for the resident to determine what kind of care, what level the resident should be at. They'll also interview other residents that maybe have similar concerns or maybe have similar care related issues. For example, if the complaint is related to wounds, not only would they interview the resident that's named in the complaint, but they may reach out to other residents that have wounds to ask them, how is your wound care? Do they conduct your wound care each day? Maybe review some of the records related to wound care and so forth. They'll also, the surveyor as part of the process will also review some facility policies, procedures as it might pertain to the complaints or the concerns that are named within the complaint. They'll speak to the facility staff and interview them regarding the care, any concerns that they may have, any issues that they may have in providing the care. And they might touch base with other key members of the care team, such as the Ombudsman group, in collaboration to identify if there's any concerns that maybe have been voiced to the Ombudsman group and not necessarily related to the IDPH surveillance group. So there's not a definitive time frame for finalizing that complaint. Sometimes they're done in as quickly as 1 to 2 days, depending on the number of allegations, the number of complaints, the severity of it. Others can take longer and multiple days to complain. So once that finalization is conducted, the surveyor will make a determination if there is any violation of the regulatory compliance in regards to the administrative state codes or the Code of Federal Regulations that are administered by Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So the surveyor will assign any applicable regulatory violation if identified and document the corresponding evidence to support that violation. In addition, the surveyor will write up the summary of the investigation activities conducted while on site. So for example, they'll write up the interviews that were conducted, which residents they spoke to, the staff that they spoke to, the records that they reviewed, and any observations of care or interactions that occurred between staff and residents while on site. And I'm kind of going through here quick because I know that we're coming to the end, so I do apologize. So the surveyor then will ensure all the documentation is completed within the current investigation. They will submit their final product or their final statement of findings to their supervisor. And then an intense quality review will occur with their supervisor, as well as a quality assurance department that we have internally. So it is reviewed to ensure that all parts of the investigation were conducted thoroughly, that we addressed all the allegation areas, and that we have all the evidence to support any regulatory non-compliance. Our quality and compliance department will ensure that we have acceptable plans of corrections if applicable. So if there were regulatory violations that were identified, we would work with the facilities to ensure that they submit an appropriate plan of correction. And then there, depending on the severity of the violation, could determine if there would be potential civil money penalties that may be assigned to the facility. And then the last part that I did forget within this slide is once that survey has been completely reviewed and finalized, a final letter of determination will be mailed to the complainant. If the complainant provided their mailing address, they do get a final follow-up letter, which would describe any findings, any regulatory violations identified if there was regulatory noncompliance. And sometimes that letter may take up to 90 days from the time that the survey was initiated, just for to ensure that the quality review and all of those steps have been sufficiently completed. So in this slide, I did just put, and I can send the links to Lee and Kelly because these are hyperlinks. So I realize that, you can't see the actual websites, but I did put, just some areas that that are viewable to the public. The quarterly reports for nursing homes. This is where the violations, the public record violations, our reports are published within IDPH. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Nursing Home Compare site lists out the similar findings only from the federal regulatory side. The administrative codes for long-term care facilities. So these are our state codes that we survey facilities for compliance for. And then the State Operations Complaint Procedures Manual is the federal guidelines on how we conduct our survey process. And then the last one here is the link for filing a complaint online if you would want to submit an electronic form to our central complaint registry. So I can send those actual links to Lee and Kelly so they can distribute if anybody would like those.
Yeah, there was a request if your PowerPoint could, I have a copy of your PowerPoint to put it on the website. Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, let me just review everything and then I can send it on. Sure.
Okay, yeah, or if you just want to send me the reference sheet, whichever
Sure.
you want to do, that would be
Sure.
great. And I put it on our website underneath the meeting.
Okay.
And then there was a question, are facilities ever shut down due to substantiated complaints?
That's a good question. So there is a process by which if facilities have recurring non-compliance and they are not able to achieve substantial compliance, meaning that, based on their plans of corrections and then their follow-ups, if they are still not able to get into compliance, they do have a time period after I think it's around 180 days. If they can't get in that time period, then they can move towards a termination track in which CMS would no longer provide funding and support for them. So therefore, it doesn't necessarily close their doors, but it makes a facility very difficult to operate if they don't have any Medicare or Medicaid funding. So we do have that process. Fortunately, we haven't had to pursue that in quite some time, but we do have, sometimes facilities do approach those long periods of time where it's difficult for them to achieve substantial compliance.
Thank you. And then Kelly, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions, Jonathan. Thank you for the presentation. When you talk about the surveyor reaching out to the complainant, is there a minimum number of attempts that the surveyor will make trying to reach that complainant that submitted the complaint?
So usually they'll usually call and leave a voicemail. And that is usually what we have done in the past. It is currently, that practice is being looked at and revisited. So that may be revised in the near future. So, but it's at least once, and then they'll leave a voicemail. And like I said, usually they leave the number for the office because that's usually the best way to get to somebody who can then redirect the call. Because it just depends on where the surveyor might be at the time, it's hard for them to receive a call if they're in the middle of, speaking to a resident or observing care or something like that.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. My other question is if the resident or whoever's filed the complaint is not in agreement with the findings once they receive them, is there any recourse that complainant has for like a
Yeah,
reevaluation?
so, and you know what, thank you for bringing that up, because I think it was on one of my slides and I probably skimmed over it as I was trying to go quick, so I apologize. So with that final letter that is sent out to the complainant, if they are not in agreement with the findings, there is information that is contained in the letter of how they can file an appeal. So they can certainly request an appeal, which would be the case would be reviewed by an administrative law judge, and they would make a determination if there needs to be a second look at it, if you will, or reinvestigation.
Okay.
Great, good information. If anybody else has any other questions, please feel free to go ahead. And I know we are running over time, so if I'm not seeing anything in there, Jonathan, I want to thank you so much. And Becky, I want to thank you for being here as well. And Kelly, of course, I want to thank you for helping so much and sharing all this information. That, this just feels like such a tangled web to everybody. So just hearing it from the people who are the experts in this area really does make it feel much more tangible for people to understand the process. So we so much appreciate your participation and engagement in today's Resident and Family Support Council meeting. And we may be tapping back into you again someday, Jonathan, Kelly, and Becky. You never know, because we love that this group comes forward with things that we want to make sure that we address. And so just like the fear of retaliation, wonderful idea that Mary gave us today. So thank you to everybody. With that, I'm just going to stop recording. But if anybody still would like to ask a question, do feel free to be able to ask that question.
Hello, everybody.